Maggie Reynolds clawed at the cracked earth with her bare hands, whispering the only prayer she had left. "Don't let me die here." No one heard her. No one came. Until he did. This is a story about what happens when the most broken man alive decides one woman's life matters more than his own peace. If you've ever been left behind by someone who was supposed to protect you, this one's for you. Subscribe to our channel. Follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The vultures found her first. There were 3 of them riding the hot air currents above the canyon ridge, lazy and patient. The way death always was in the summer heat of Wyoming. They didn't circle low yet. They were waiting. They'd learned over years of desert living that the ones who stopped moving didn't always stop breathing right away. So they waited. Maggie Reynolds was still moving, barely, but still. Her fingers dragged across the sun-baked ground, pulling herself forward 1 inch at a time, her cheeks scraping against grit and stone. Her dress, what was left of it, was torn along the left shoulder. The pale cotton turned rust brown from dust and dried blood. She didn't know how long she'd been crawling. The sun had moved. That was all she knew. It had been directly above her when she started, and now it was tilting west, painting the canyon walls in shades of copper and bone. She had stopped crying 2 hours ago. There was no water left in her for tears. "Get up," she told herself. Her voice came out cracked, barely a sound at all. "Maggie Reynolds, you get up." She didn't get up. Her arms gave out and she dropped face first into the dirt, and for one long, terrible moment, she just lay there. Breathing. Just breathing. Feeling the earth burn against her split lip, her swollen cheekbone, the place on her ribs where something had cracked 2 nights ago when Caleb's boot had found her in the dark. Caleb. The name moved through her like cold water, sharp and clarifying. She pushed herself up again. One arm, then the other. Her elbows trembled. She was not going to die in Caleb Larson's dirt. She refused. She had made herself that promise while she was still lying on the floor of the mining office, listening to him tell his men to take her out past the canyon and leave her. "Don't bring her back," he'd said. His voice had been so calm. That was always the worst part about Caleb, the calm. Like she was a problem to be disposed of, not a person. Not his wife. Not anymore, she thought. Never again. She got her knees under her. Then, inch by grinding inch, she got herself upright. Her vision swam. The canyon walls tilted sideways, and she threw one hand out, catching nothing but air, staggering forward 3 steps, before her boot caught a rock, and she went down again, this time onto her hands and knees, palms tearing open on the ground. She made a sound she didn't recognize. Something between a cry and a laugh. She looked at her bleeding palms, and she laughed again harder, the kind of laugh that had absolutely nothing funny in it. "All right," she said to nobody. To the vultures, maybe. "All right." She didn't hear the horse. She heard the man first, a low, sharp whistle, the kind that meant easy, easy, and then hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, coming around the far edge of the canyon outcropping. She didn't lift her head. She didn't have the strength for hope anymore, and she'd learned early that hope was the thing that broke you worst. Jack Carter pulled his Mustang to a stop 30 yards out. He'd been heading for Ridgeline, minding his own affairs, keeping to the canyon trail because it was faster and shadier than the open plain, and because he wanted to put 20 miles between himself and the last town before nightfall. He had not been looking for trouble. He had not been looking for anything. He saw her anyway. He sat in the saddle for a moment, one hand resting easy on the horn, and he looked at the woman on her hands and knees in the canyon dirt. He looked at the 3 vultures above her. He looked at the way her arms were shaking. He looked away. He looked back. He said something very quiet under his breath, something not fit for polite company, and he stepped down off the horse. His boots hit the ground, and the sound made her flinch, every muscle in her body pulling inward, her shoulders curling up around her ears. She turned her head just enough to see the boots, men's boots, big, coming toward her. "Don't," she said. The word came out stronger than she expected. "Don't you come near me." He stopped. "Yes, ma'am." She looked up then. The sun was behind him, and she couldn't make out his face clearly, just the shape of him, broad through the shoulders, wearing a battered trail coat, a worn hat pushed back on his head. His hands were down at his sides open, not reaching for anything. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "Nobody ever says they're going to," she said. A beat of silence. He took that hit without flinching. "Fair enough," he said. "You need water." "I need a lot of things." "Water first." He crouched down, making himself smaller, and she noticed he moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who understood that sudden movements around frightened things didn't end well. He pulled a canteen from his coat. "I'm going to set this on the ground and step back. You can get it yourself." "All right." She stared at him. Her throat was so dry it hurt to swallow. "Why?" she said. "Because you need it." "I don't know you." "No, ma'am, you don't." He set the canteen down on the ground gently and stood back up, took 2 full steps back. "Name's Jack Carter. I've been riding through. That's the whole of it." She looked at the canteen. She looked at him. Every instinct she'd spent the last 4 years developing, the ones that had kept her alive through everything Caleb had put her through, were screaming at her. Men who helped didn't ask for nothing. Men who helped always wanted something in return. She knew that down to her bones. She also knew she was going to die in the next few hours if she didn't drink something. She crawled to the canteen. She kept her eyes on him the whole time. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there with his hands at his sides while she got her shaking fingers around the canteen and drank too fast at first, then catching herself, slowing down, making herself take it carefully. When she finally lowered it, she wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist and looked at him. "Thank you," she said. The words tasted strange. She hadn't said them to a man in a long time. "Yes, ma'am." He tilted his head slightly. "Can you stand?" "I stood before you got here." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the idea of one. "I saw that." She got herself upright again. It took longer than she wanted it to. He didn't come forward to help her, and she was grateful for that. She didn't know what she would have done if he'd tried to touch her. She locked her knees and stood and breathed and looked at him straight for the first time. He was older than she'd initially thought. Maybe 40, maybe a few years past it. Hard-lived the way men got out here, the kind of weathered that had nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with a life spent in the open. He had dark eyes that were watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. Not pity. Pity she would have recognized and resented. Something else. Something quieter. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Away," she said. "From what?" "That's not your business." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He was quiet for a moment. "You're hurt. Not just the surface stuff. Something on your left side, you're holding it." She glanced down. She hadn't noticed she'd been doing it. Her right arm was crossed over her body, her hand pressed against her ribs. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not." He said it without heat. Just a statement. "I've got a camp set up about 2 miles west off the canyon trail. Clean water, fire, some food. You're welcome to it." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you're a person," he said. "And you're hurt. That's all the reason I need." She almost didn't believe him. She waited for the rest of it. The conditions, the expectations, the implicit arrangement that all help from men came wrapped in. But he just looked at her steady and patient and didn't add anything else. "I don't go anywhere with men I don't know," she said. "Reasonable," he said. "You can follow behind. 40 yards if you want. I won't close the distance." He turned back toward his horse. "Or don't come at all. I'll leave the canteen." He started walking. He didn't look back. She stood there listening to the creak of leather as he settled back into the saddle. She looked up at the vultures. They were lower now, closer. "Mr. Carter," she called. He stopped, but didn't turn. 2 miles. 2 miles, he said. You'll smell the fire before you see it. She didn't walk 40 yards behind him. She walked 20 close enough to keep him in clear sight, far enough that she had time to think if she needed to run. Her ribs made every step a negotiation. Her feet were bleeding inside her boots. She'd lost one heel somewhere on the canyon floor, and her gait was uneven hitching, and she hated that he could see it. He rode slow. He didn't look back. She watched him anyway. The set of his shoulders. The way he sat, the horse relaxed but alert, like someone who'd spent so many years on horseback that the animal was just an extension of himself. The trail coat was old and well maintained. His rifle was sheathed at the saddle, not in his hands. She catalogued all of it. The camp was where he'd said it was. A clearing just off the trail, sheltered by a rock formation, on 2 sides, with a fire burned down to steady coals and a bedroll laid out flat. A pack horse was tethered nearby, loaded with provisions, clean and organized. The camp of a man who had been living on the trail long enough to do it properly. He dismounted and started unsaddling his horse without looking at her. Like her presence was already an established fact, nothing to make a fuss over. "Sit," he said. "There's dried meat and biscuits in the left saddlebag. Help yourself." She didn't sit. She stood at the edge of the camp and looked at everything in it. The bedroll, the pack, his rifle now leaning against the rock formation, his hands moving through the familiar work of unhitching straps, sure and efficient. "Where are you going?" she said. "Actually going. When you leave here." "Ridgeline." He didn't pause in his work. "Got business there." "What kind of business?" "The quiet kind." He pulled the saddle free and set it down. "The kind that doesn't involve anyone getting shot." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Caleb Larson's men work out of Ridgeline." His hand stopped. He stood there for one still moment, his back to her. Then he turned, and his face had changed, gone a shade more careful, a shade more still. "Say that name again," he said. "Caleb Larson," she said. She watched his face. "You know it." He didn't answer immediately. He pulled off his hat, turned it in his hands, once put it back on. A man buying himself time to think. "I know the name," he said. "Most people in Wyoming know the name." He studied her. "How do you know it?" "He's my husband," she said. "Was. Is." She pressed her hand harder against her ribs. "I don't know what the legal word is for a man who tries to have his wife killed and left in the canyon." Something happened in his expression that she didn't expect. Not surprise. More like confirmation, the look of a man who'd suspected something and just had it proved to him. "He did this to you," Jack said. It wasn't a question. "His men," she said. "2 of them. On his orders." Silence. The fire crackled between them. A horse snorted somewhere in the dark. The summer heat pressed in from all sides, thick and dry, smelling of dust and sage. "Sit down," he said finally. "Please." Something in the please got through. She sat carefully, bracing herself on one arm, trying not to let him see what it cost her. He crouched on the other side of the fire and looked at her across the coals. "What do you want?" he asked. "What do you mean, what do I want?" "You're heading somewhere," he said. "Even on your hands and knees in a canyon, you were heading somewhere." "Where?" She met his eyes. They were darker up close and steady in a way that made her uncomfortable. The kind of steady that meant this man had looked at terrible things and hadn't flinched away from any of them. "Ridgeline," she said. He was very quiet. "My husband has something that belongs to me," she continued. "A journal. My father's journal. It has everything, every name, every claim, every piece of land he stole, and every man he paid off to do it. Every death he ordered. All of it written in my father's hand before Caleb had him killed." Her voice didn't shake. She had practiced keeping it steady. I am going to get it back, and I am going to make sure it reaches the territorial marshal. Caleb Larson has 30 armed men, Jack said. I know that. The marshal in Ridgeline is on his payroll. I know that too. She looked at him. I know everything about Caleb Larson. I've spent 4 years learning every inch of his operation from the inside. A beat. I also know that the federal marshal out of Cheyenne is not on his payroll, and I know where Caleb keeps the journal, and I know his routine well enough to walk into that office when it's empty and walk back out. Jack stared at her. She stared back. That's a plan that gets you killed, he said. I've already almost been killed twice this week, she said. I'm getting less impressed by the threat. He looked at her for a long time. She couldn't read his expression anymore. It had gone somewhere complicated, somewhere interior, working through things she wasn't privy to. He pulled a hand down his face, rough against the stubble. You're going to Ridgeline, he said. Yes. Whether I help you or not. That was never a question. He stood up. He walked to the pack horse and dug out dried meat and hard biscuits and brought them back and set them in front of her. Then he sat back down across the fire. Eat, he said. Then we'll see about those ribs. That's not an answer, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. He looked at the fire. Eat first. She ate. She watched him while she did, trying to understand what was happening behind that quiet, weathered face. He wasn't a simple man, she could tell that much already. There was something in him that had been pulled very tight for a very long time, and whatever it was, the mention of Caleb Larson's name had made it pull tighter. Why are you really going to Ridgeline? She said, when she'd eaten enough to take the edge off. He didn't answer right away. I told you, he said. Business. What kind of business involves a man who looks like he's trying to disappear going directly toward the most dangerous town in Wyoming? He glanced up at her. One corner of his mouth moved, though she couldn't tell if it was toward a smile or away from one. You're sharp, he said. Not a compliment exactly. More like a fact being noted. I'm alive, she said. Sharp is why. The fire burned lower. Somewhere above the canyon walls, the night sky had gone fully dark, the stars enormous and indifferent. The way summer stars always were out here. She could feel her ribs with every breath, a constant grinding reminder of where she was and what had brought her here. My brother, Jack said. The words came out slow, like he wasn't entirely sure he'd meant to say them. She waited. Caleb Larson had my brother's claim jumped 3 years ago. Tom filed the paperwork legal, worked that land for 2 years, built something on it. He paused. Caleb wanted the silver underneath it, so he had Tom's deed declared fraudulent by a judge he owned, and when Tom tried to fight it... Another pause. Longer. Tom's dead. She didn't say she was sorry. It would have felt like an insult to both of them. Was it in the journal? She asked. Your brother's name? He looked at her. I don't know. Maybe. If it is, she said carefully, getting that journal to the federal marshal doesn't just stop Caleb from hurting anyone else. It means Tom gets justice. The word justice landed between them like a stone dropped in still water, and she watched the rings of it move across his face. He was quiet for a very long time. Let me look at those ribs, he said finally. Jack. I heard you, he said. I'm thinking. He stood up and went to the pack again, coming back with a strip of cloth. Let me look first, then I'll give you an answer. She sat still while he knelt beside her and carefully worked the torn fabric of her dress away from her side. His hands were very careful. More careful, she thought, than they looked like they should be, big, rough-knuckled hands. Hands that had done hard things, but careful. 2 ribs, he said quietly. Maybe 3. Hard to tell without a doctor. They're not separated, I don't think, but they're cracked. He began wrapping the cloth around her torso, slow and even. This won't fix it. It'll hold it so you can move. She breathed through it, didn't make a sound. When he was done, he sat back on his heels and looked at her. Ridgeline is 3 days' ride, he said. If we take the canyon route, we can stay off the main road and avoid Caleb's patrols. He picked up his hat from beside him and turned it in his hands. His men are going to come back to check that you're dead. When they find you're not, they'll start looking. I know, she said. You have a plan for when we get there. Something more than walk in and hope. She looked at him. I have people inside. Caleb's housekeeper. She was loyal to my father before she was loyal to Caleb. She'll get me access. A beat. If I can get word to her before we move. There's a way station at the canyon mouth, he said. Porter runs it. He's not Caleb's man. Caleb burned him out 2 years back, and Porter's been sitting on that grudge ever since. He can get a message to someone in town. She blinked. You know the area. I've been riding it for 6 months, he said, learning it. He met her eyes. I wasn't going to Ridgeline for quiet business, Maggie. The sound of her name in his mouth, her real name, not ma'am, not miss, startled her. She didn't show it. You were going for Tom, she said. I was going to find proof, he said. And I was going in alone, which was probably going to get me killed. He stood up. Your journal changes things. If what you say is in it, it's in it, she said. I've read it. Every page. He looked at her for a long moment. The fire was barely coals now, and the light was low and orange, and his face was half in shadow. Then we ride at first light, he said. Canyon route. 3 days. He moved back to his side of the fire. Get some sleep. You're going to need it. You're helping me, she said. It wasn't a question, but it came out like one. Somebody left you to die in a canyon today, he said. He lay down on his bedroll and pulled his hat over his face. Figure somebody ought to try the other thing. She sat with that for a moment, turning it over. Why? She said one last time. His voice came from under the hat flat and certain the way a man speaks when he's already made peace with a decision. Because Tom would have helped you, he said, and because I've spent 3 years being a man Tom wouldn't recognize. Figure it's time I started being someone he would. Silence settled between them, thick with summer heat and distant crickets, and the soft sound of horses breathing. Maggie Reynolds lay down on the hard ground, wrapped her arm carefully around her cracked ribs, and stared up at the enormous, indifferent stars. She did not sleep for a long time, but for the first time in 4 years, she was not afraid of the dark. She was already awake when he stirred. Jack opened his eyes and found her sitting up on the other side of the dead fire, her back straight, despite the ribs, her hands wrapped around her knees, watching the dark. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. The sky had just started to go gray at the eastern edge, the stars fading one by one, like someone was slowly turning down a lantern, and the summer heat was already building, already pressing down on the canyon like a hand. He got up, started the fire, put water on. She watched him without speaking. You sleep at all? He asked. Some, she said, which meant no. He didn't push it. He understood what it was to lie in the dark with your mind running too fast, and your body too tired to catch up. He'd spent 3 years sleeping like that, half awake, half somewhere else in the country, between exhaustion and remembering. He just handed her a tin cup when the water was hot and crouched across from her and drank his own. There are things I need to know before we ride, she said. All right. What you said last night about Tom, about 6 months learning the canyon routes. She looked at him steadily. You were planning to go into Ridgeline alone and do what exactly? He set down his cup. Get into the mining records office. Find the deed transfer documents. Get copies to Cheyenne. You'd have been dead before you got within a mile of that office. Probably, he said. But I ran out of legal options 8 months ago, and I wasn't willing to run out of all of them. He picked up his cup again. Your journal is better. If it's what you say it is, we don't need the records office. We walk into Cheyenne with that book, and Caleb Larson burns. He burns, she agreed. But not fast enough if he knows I'm still alive. He'll move the journal. He'll clear out anything that ties him to my father's death. She looked at her hands. We have maybe 4 days before his men come back looking for a body and start asking questions. Then we don't waste the morning. He stood, put his cup away, started breaking camp with efficient, practiced movements. She stood 2 slower, one arm braced against her side. He noticed and said nothing, and she was grateful for that. Jack, she said. He looked up. Those men who left me in the canyon, Eli Crow, and a man called Dutch. Crow runs Caleb's enforcement. She held his gaze. They'll be the ones Caleb sends when he finds out I'm alive. Not his regular men, Crow. Something moved through Jack's expression, dark and brief like a shadow crossing water. I know Crow, he said. How? He pulled the saddle up onto the Mustang's back. His jaw was tight. He was there when Tom died, he said. He was the one who delivered the eviction order, and when Tom refused to leave, he stopped, worked the cinch strap. Crow was the last one who saw him alive. The silence between them held the weight of that. Then we agree, she said quietly, that Eli Crow doesn't walk away from this. Jack's hands went still for just a moment. Then he finished the cinch and turned around. We agree, he said. They reached Porter's way station by mid-morning. It was a low, wide building at the canyon mouth, set into the rock like it had grown there, patched in a dozen places with different materials, and none of them matching. A mean-looking dog came out barking and then stopped when Jack spoke to it in a low voice. Animals trusted him, Maggie noticed. The way some men were something in them that creatures could read even when people couldn't. The man who came out behind the dog was built like a barrel that had been left out in the weather too long solid once, now warped and weathered with a white beard and eyes the color of a clouded sky. He looked at Jack, and then he looked at Maggie, and his expression went through several changes very quickly. Carter, he said. Porter. Jack stepped down off the horse. We need a message carried into Ridgeline. Today, if it can be managed. Porter looked at Maggie. Not with anything threatening, just with the slow, careful appraisal of a man who had learned to read trouble before it read him. His eyes went to the bruising along her jaw, to the way she was holding herself on the horse. That Larson's wife, he said. Maggie answered before Jack could. That's Maggie Reynolds, she said. Larson's wife is dead. Caleb left her in the canyon 2 days ago. Porter looked at her for a long moment. Then he made a sound in the back of his throat that was not quite a word and turned back to Jack. Who's the message for? He said. A woman called Ruth, Maggie said. She works the Larson house. Tell her the bluebird is coming home. She'll know what it means. Porter's eyebrows went up. He looked at Jack. Jack looked back at him with an expression that said, I know, I know. That's all? Porter said. That's all she needs, Maggie said. Porter looked at her for another moment, then stepped back toward the door. Come inside, he said. I'll get my boy to ride in. It'll cost you. Whatever it costs, Jack said. Inside, over coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime last week and reheated daily since Porter leaned both elbows on the table and looked at Maggie with those clouded sky eyes. You actually got what everyone says you got, he said. The book? She looked at him carefully. What does everyone say? Word that's been moving through the canyon for 6 months, quiet word, the kind that don't travel in daylight. Porter wrapped both hands around his cup. That there's a journal. That Larson's wife knew where it was. That if anybody ever got their hands on it, half the territorial government would burn. He looked at Jack. That's why you've been out here, ain't it? Waiting on that. 6 months is a long time to wait, Jack said. You're a patient man. Porter looked at Maggie. "Where is it now?" "In Caleb's office," she said. "In the mining building. False bottom in the left desk drawer. I put it there myself because he trusted me to keep his records and never thought to ask what else I might keep alongside them." She paused. "He doesn't know I've read it. He kept it because it was leverage, and he's the kind of man who always needs leverage on everyone around him. He'd never burn it as long as he thought nobody else knew what was in it." Porter was quiet for a moment. Then he made that sound again. "You're either the bravest woman in Wyoming," he said, "or the most reckless one." "She's been building this for 4 years, Jack said, and the steadiness in his voice when he said it made Maggie look at him sideways, like he was defending something he'd already decided to believe in. "There's a difference between reckless and patient." Porter looked at Jack. Something passed between the two men that Maggie couldn't quite read. Old respect maybe, or shared history, or just the recognition that two people who had both been burned by the same fire had some understanding the rest of the world didn't. "All right," Porter said finally. He stood up. "I'll get the boy on the road. You two rest an hour. That woman's in no condition to ride hard, and you got 2 days before you need to be in position anyway." He pointed at Maggie without ceremony. "Eat something. You look like a strong wind would end the conversation." She almost smiled. It surprised her. The message was on its way before noon. They rode out of the way station with the sun direct overhead, Jack half a length ahead, the canyon walls rising on either side, and the summer heat pressing down so thick it had almost a color. Maggie rode with her spine straight and her arm pressed to her side and didn't complain, and Jack rode like a man who was doing his arithmetic, running numbers, running risks, working through the problem, the way you worked through the terrain, one ridge at a time. He'd been quiet since they left Porter's, the thinking kind of quiet. "Say it," Maggie said. He glanced over. "Say what?" "Whatever's been sitting behind your teeth since we left." He was quiet for another moment. Then, "Crow's not going to wait for Caleb to send him. When he comes back to check the canyon and finds nothing, no body, no tracks, nothing, he's not going to run back to Caleb first. He's going to start moving on his own." He paused. "Crow likes to finish things." She'd known this. Had known it in the back of her mind since she'd gotten upright in the canyon and started moving. But hearing it out loud was different from knowing it silently. "How long do we have before he figures out the canyon?" she said. "He left you 2 days ago. He'll give it 1 more day, maybe 2 before he goes back to confirm." "Oh." Jack's voice was flat and certain, the voice of someone reading a situation they'd studied. "That's if he's not already suspicious. If something felt wrong to him when he rode away." "He was certain," she said. "When they rode away, I wasn't moving. I wasn't making any sound. I'd been—" She stopped, started again. "I'd learned how to be very still and very quiet. From years of practice." He thought I was done. Jack's jaw tightened. She saw it from the corner of her eye. "Then we have 2 days," he said. "Maybe 3. We need to move faster than I'd planned." "How much faster?" "We skip the canyon route's second leg, cut across the open flat tonight, ride through the dark, hit the ridge above ridgeline by tomorrow morning." He looked at her. "Your ribs." "My ribs are my problem. They'll slow us down if—" "Jack?" She looked at him directly. "I rode for 3 miles this morning with 2 cracked ribs, and I'll ride for 30 more tonight. Don't make decisions for me about what I can manage. Ask me." He looked at her. A long, assessing look. "Can you manage it?" he said. "Yes." "All right," he said. "We ride tonight." They rode on in silence. Then after a while she said, "Tell me about Tom." He didn't answer right away. She thought maybe he wasn't going to. Then, "Tom was the younger one," he said. "By 3 years. He was the one who was supposed to have the good life, the one who made the right choices, went west for the right reasons. Filed his claim clean, worked it honest, built a house on it with his own hands." Something shifted in his voice. Not breaking men like Jack didn't break in their voices, but bending. He had a woman he was planning to marry, Ruth Ann. She waited a year after he died before she gave up and moved on. I don't blame her. He stopped. You weren't there, Maggie said. I was 3 months out of Laramie when it happened. By the time the news reached me, Tom had been in the ground for 6 weeks. He kept his eyes forward. I went to Ridgeline, tried to ask questions, got told by 4 different people that Tom had lost his claim fair and legal, and that whatever happened after that wasn't the concern of the town. A beat. Third man who told me that had Caleb Larson's money in his pocket. I found that out later. By then, I'd already been run out of town by Crow's men with a strong suggestion I don't come back. But you came back, she said. I came back, he agreed. Slower, smarter. 6 months learning every road and canyon and way station between here and the territorial line. He tilted his head slightly. And then I found a woman dying in the dirt who turned out to be the one person in Wyoming who actually had the means to finish what I'd spent 3 years on. She considered that. You think Tom would call that luck? Tom would call it the Lord's timing, Jack said, and his voice went somewhere briefly that she recognized the specific quiet of a person saying a name that still hurt. Tom was better at believing in things than I am. Maybe, Maggie said. Or maybe you're better at it than you think. A man who doesn't believe in anything doesn't spend 6 months in a canyon on a dead man's behalf. He didn't answer that, but his shoulders moved very slightly in a way that wasn't quite discomfort and wasn't quite acceptance, and was somewhere in between. They were 2 hours into the afternoon when the riders appeared. 3 of them coming fast along the ridgeline above and ahead, kicking up dust that hung in the still summer air like signal smoke. Jack saw them before she did. His whole body went sharp and still in the saddle. In the way animals went still when they heard something wrong, and Maggie followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. Caleb's men, she said, voice low. Can't tell yet. He didn't move. Don't run. Running confirms it. She made herself sit still, made herself breathe. Her heart was doing something terrible, and she put every year of practice into making her face show nothing. The riders came close enough that she could see their faces. She knew the one in the middle. Her hand tightened on the reins without meaning to. Billy Marsh, one of Caleb's junior men, young and mean, and eager to prove himself. He'd been in the room when Caleb gave the order for the canyon. He'd looked at her while Caleb spoke, and he'd smiled. He was looking at her now. And then his eyes moved to Jack, and then moved away, and the 3 riders swept past without slowing, heading back the way Maggie and Jack had come. She didn't breathe until they were 50 yards past. He recognized me, she said. I know, Jack said. His voice had changed, flat, decisive. He'll ride back to Crow. By tonight, Crow knows you're alive and you're moving. He didn't pause. Everything changes. We can't go to Ridgeline directly now. We have to. The journal. If we ride into Ridgeline now, we ride into 30 armed men who are expecting us. He turned his horse off the trail without hesitating, heading into the broken rock along the canyon wall. Come with me. Now. We need to get off this road. She followed him, her mind moving fast. The journal. Ruth. The message they'd sent. If Crow moved on Ridgeline before they got there, if he found Ruth, if he searched the house, if something alerted Caleb to the journal's importance. There's another way in, she said. Into Ridgeline. A supply tunnel. Caleb had it built to run silver out without going through town. It comes out behind the assay office 50 yards from the mining building. She urged her horse up alongside his. Nobody uses it in summer because of the heat inside. Caleb's men don't patrol it. Jack looked at her. You know the entrance. I walked it twice when Caleb was showing it to investors. I remember every step. She held his gaze. If we go around the southern ridge and come in through the creek bed, we can reach the tunnel entrance without going anywhere near the main road. He studied her for a moment. Then, "How long is the tunnel?" "Half a mile. Maybe a little more." In the dark. "I've been navigating Caleb Larson's world in the dark for 4 years," she said. "Half a mile of tunnel is nothing." Something shifted in his expression, not quite admiration, because men like Jack didn't show admiration easily, but close. The honest recognition that he was looking at someone who had survived things he could only guess at, and had come out the other side with their mind intact and their plan unbroken. "Southern Ridge," he said. "Show me." "Gladly," she said. They pushed the horses hard, cutting south along the canyon wall. And behind them, the dust from Billy Marsh's horses was still hanging in the still summer air, and Maggie Reynolds was already 3 moves ahead, already recalculating, already turning the changed shape of the danger into the next part of the plan. Because that was what 4 years with Caleb Larson had taught her: how to think under pressure, how to adapt without breaking, how to take the worst thing that just happened and make it useful. She was good at surviving. She had never been more sure of that than right now. But the tunnel was a problem she hadn't counted on sharing with anyone, and Jack Carter was about to find out why. Because there was something she hadn't told him yet, something she'd left out of the accounting she'd given him last night, sitting across the fire, while her ribs ached and her carefully constructed plan shifted and settled around the new shape of him being in it. Something that lived inside that tunnel waiting. She had another reason to get to that journal, and it had nothing to do with Caleb, and nothing to do with justice. And when Jack found out, if he found out, she did not know if he would keep riding with her. She kept that thought moving fast, and buried it deep, and focused on the ridge ahead, and the horse moved under her, and the summer heat pushed down on them both, like a hand pressing something fragile, very, very hard. The southern ridge was harder than she'd remembered. Not the terrain. The terrain was what it was, broken rock and dry creek bed, and the kind of summer heat that made the air shimmer and lie to you about distance. The hard part was Jack riding beside her and not asking the question she could feel him building toward. He had the patience of a man who'd spent 6 months alone in canyon country, and that patience was pointed directly at her, and she felt it, the way you felt a storm coming, not yet here, but certain. She was trying to figure out how much to tell him before they reached the tunnel entrance. Not because she didn't trust him. That was the strange part. She trusted him more than she'd trusted anyone in 4 years, and she'd known him for less than 24 hours, and that fact alone was enough to make her deeply uneasy. Trust was a thing Caleb had systematically taken apart in her piece by piece, the way you dismantled a clock carefully, thoroughly, until all the parts were separate and none of them told time anymore. And yet here she was trusting Jack Carter, almost despite herself. "You've gone quiet," he said. "I'm thinking." "I noticed." A beat. About what? She looked at him sideways. His eyes were forward, watching the ridge. His face was easy, unhurried, but she'd learned enough of him already to know that the ease was practiced, that underneath it he was reading everything around him the same way he'd been reading everything since the moment she'd first seen him. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said. He didn't react, just kept riding. "I figured," he said. She blinked. "You figured?" A woman who spent 4 years building a plan inside a man like Caleb Larson's house didn't give me the whole of it sitting across a fire on the first night. He glanced at her. "I'm not offended. I just figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She looked at him for a moment, then she looked away. "My father had a partner," she said. "Before Caleb, before any of this. A man named Daniel Holt. They ran the land surveys together. My father did the legal work. Holt did the field work. And between them, they mapped half the mineral claims in this territory before Caleb came in and started buying judges." She paused. "Holt disappeared the same year my father died. Caleb told me he'd gone east, that the business had dissolved and Holt had taken his share and left." Her jaw tightened. "That was a lie." "Where is Holt?" Jack said. "I don't know. That's the problem." She took a breath. "There are pages in the journal my father's handwriting near the end that aren't about Caleb's crimes. They're about something my father found. Something he was hiding from Caleb. Something he and Holt had mapped separately off the books that Caleb never knew about. She looked at Jack. I don't know what it is. My father wrote it in a private cipher, something he and I had between us when I was a girl, a code game we played. He must have known toward the end that Caleb was coming for him. He put the most important thing he knew in the only language Caleb couldn't read. Jack was quiet. And you're the only one who can decode it, he said. Yes. And you haven't told the federal marshal about this part. I haven't told anyone. She met his eyes. Whatever my father hid, whatever he and Holt found, it's worth killing over. My father died for it. Holt disappeared for it. If I hand that journal to a marshal without knowing what those pages say, I hand it to a man I've never met, and whatever my father was protecting goes into a government file and disappears. Her voice had gone tight. I need to read those pages first. I need to know what he died protecting. Jack rode in silence for a long moment. The horses picked their way through the dry creek bed, hooves clicking against loose stone. That's why you didn't run, he said finally. After Caleb had you taken to the canyon. Most women in that situation, they'd run. Get out of Wyoming, get east, get gone. He looked at her. But you crawled toward Ridgeline. My father's answers are in that journal, she said. And the journal is in Ridgeline, so yes. And the justice, he said. The marshal, that's real too. That's real, she said firmly. Caleb burns either way. I just want to know what my father knew before he does. She waited. Does that change things for you? He took a while answering, long enough that her chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with her ribs. No, he said. It doesn't change things. He looked at her steadily. But next time there's something I need to know, tell me straight. I can handle the truth a lot better than surprises when we're standing in the middle of something. Understood, she said. Then, that's all of it. Everything. All right, he said. And he said it the way he said most things, like a door closing cleanly on the matter, no drama, no accusation. Just settled. She had the sudden, disorienting thought that she had never in her life met a man who handled the truth like that. The tunnel entrance was exactly where she remembered it. They left the horses tethered in the creek bed, hidden under the overhang, where the rock jutted out enough to give shade. Jack brought his rifle, and she brought the small knife she'd been carrying strapped to her inner boot, since the first morning, a fact she hadn't mentioned, and he hadn't asked about, and she suspected he'd already noticed. The entrance was narrow, low overhead. Jack had to angle sideways to get through the first 10 feet, and she heard him breathe through the adjustment without complaint. Inside, the heat was different, trapped, and still the kind that had been sitting in an enclosed space since morning, and had nowhere to go. It pressed against her face like a hand. Her ribs tightened with every step. She counted paces. Old habit she'd counted on the way out 2 years ago, and she'd counted again in her memory 100 times since. 412 steps to the junction, turn right, another 208 to the grate. Jack moved behind her. She could hear him, not much, he was quiet, but she could hear his breathing and the soft scuff of his boots, and it was strange having him close in the dark. Not threatening, just strange. She'd been alone in the dark for so long that another person's presence in it felt almost foreign. Stop, he said very low. She stopped. Her heart jumped. Someone's been through here recently, he said. She felt, rather than saw him crouch beside her. Grounds disturbed. 3 sets of tracks, maybe 4, coming from the town side. Her stomach went cold. How recently? Hours, not days. He stood. Keep moving, but quiet. She moved faster. The count went out of her head, and she had to drag it back 340, 341. Her breathing controlled and deliberate, her hand trailing the wall. Jack a steady presence 2 steps behind. They reached the junction. She turned right and stopped dead. There was light ahead, faint orange flickering the light of a single lantern maybe 60 yards down the tunnel, and in front of it a silhouette, sitting, waiting. Jack's hand came to her shoulder. Steady. Don't move. She didn't move. The silhouette stirred, and then a voice came down the tunnel, low and careful, speaking to the darkness like it expected an answer. "Maggie Reynolds," the voice said. "I've been waiting on you for 2 days." She knew the voice. Ruth. She let out a breath that felt like it had been held for a week. Jack's hand loosened on her shoulder. She stepped forward, and Ruth's lantern light found her face, and the old woman stood up from where she'd been sitting on the tunnel floor with a blanket under her and a rifle across her knees, and looked at Maggie with eyes that had been crying recently and were done with it now. "Lord above," Ruth said, "what did he do to you?" "I'm standing," Maggie said. "That's what matters." She crossed the distance between them, and Ruth took her by the face with both rough hands and looked at her the way a woman looked at something she'd been afraid was gone. "When your message came through, Porter's boy," Ruth said, "I nearly fell down. I didn't believe it. I told myself it was a trick." She pulled Maggie into her arms carefully, feeling the hitch of pain and adjusting, holding her like something breakable. "Your face. Your poor face." "Ruth." Maggie pulled back. Urgent. "The journal. Is it still in the office?" Ruth's expression shifted, and Maggie's blood went cold. "He moved it," Ruth said. The 3 words hit like stones. "When?" Jack said from behind Maggie. Ruth looked at him sharply. She hadn't registered him in the first moment, and her hand moved toward the rifle across her knees before Maggie's voice stopped her. "He's with me. He's all right." Maggie turned back to Ruth. "When did Caleb move it?" "Yesterday morning, early, before sunrise." Ruth set down the rifle. "He called for his private men. Not Crow, his inside men, the ones he keeps for the house, and I heard him through the office door. He said there was a loose thread. That's what he called you." Her jaw tightened at the word. "He moved the journal and 3 other boxes of documents to the mine itself. Level 3. The old survey room." Jack said something very quiet. Maggie stood absolutely still, making herself process the information instead of the feeling of it. The office had been their way in. Controlled, familiar, accessible. The mine was a different problem, entirely deeper guarded terrain she didn't know the same way. "He knows I'm alive," she said. "I don't know how," Ruth said. "But yes, he knows." Billy Marsh. The road. He'd recognized her and turned his horse around. He'd been riding to Caleb, not Crow. "How many men at the mine?" Jack said. His voice was practical, immediate, already moving through the new problem the way he'd moved through terrain. 6 on the surface, 4 below on any given shift. Ruth looked at him. "And Crow came back this morning. He's in town. Caleb's keeping him close." "Crow's in Ridgeline," Jack said, and the words were for Maggie. His eyes were measuring something. "Yes," Ruth said. "And there's more." She looked at Maggie. "Caleb held a meeting last night. I heard most of it through the kitchen wall. He's not just protecting the journal now, he's planning something." She pressed her lips together. "He's moving the land claims. All of them. Transferring the deeds through an agent in Denver, a lawyer named Marsh, no relation to Billy." "If the deeds transfer to a third party," Maggie said, and she heard her own voice go flat with understanding, "then even if the journal reaches the marshal, the land is already legally gone. The evidence proves the theft, but there's nothing to give back. And 30 families lose their land anyway," Jack said. "He's timed it," Maggie said. She pressed her hand to her side. Her ribs were screaming, and she barely felt it. He knew this was coming eventually. He built a fallback. If the journal ever got out, he'd already be protected. She looked at Jack. He looked at her. "How long?" Jack said to Ruth. "The transfer agent arrives in 4 days," Ruth said. "Once the papers are signed, it's done." 4 days. and Crow in town, and the journal 40 feet underground in a mine they didn't have maps of, guarded by men they couldn't count on being able to avoid. Maggie turned and walked 6 paces back down the tunnel, just enough to breathe without anyone watching her face while she did it. She put her hand flat on the tunnel wall. The rock was warm under her palm. Her ribs moved in and out. She let herself feel the full weight of it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she turned around. "Ruth," she said. "The mine survey room. Is it on the original plans?" Ruth frowned. "The plans Caleb filed. My father drew those plans, before Caleb bought the mine. They were in the Territorial Records Office in Cheyenne before Caleb could have them pulled." She looked at Ruth. "Did you ever see a second set? A copy? My father always kept a copy." Ruth was very still for a moment. Then she looked at the floor, then she looked up. "There's a lockbox," she said slowly. "In my room. It was your father's. He gave it to me the week before he died. Told me to keep it and give it to no one but you." Her voice was careful. "I've had it for 4 years, Maggie. I kept it under the floorboard. I was waiting for you to come back." The tunnel went very quiet. "You have a lockbox from my father," Maggie said, "that you've been holding for 4 years. I didn't know what was in it. He didn't tell me." Ruth looked at her steadily. "I trusted that you'd come back and it would matter. I trusted your father." She paused. "And I trusted you." Maggie stood absolutely still. Jack spoke carefully from behind her. "If your father kept a copy of the mine plans, we'd know exactly where the survey room is," Maggie finished. "Every shaft, every level, every access point." She looked at Ruth. "I need that box." "I know," Ruth said. "That's why I've been sitting in this tunnel for 2 days waiting for a dead woman." She picked up her lantern and her rifle and straightened her back. "Come on then. My room is on the east side of the house. Caleb doesn't go near the kitchen quarters." "Ruth," Jack stepped forward. "If Crow is in town and Caleb knows she's alive, the house isn't safe. Not tonight." "No," Ruth agreed. She looked at him with clear, unimpressed eyes. "But my room has a floorboard, and the mine has a 4-day clock, and I didn't hold on to that box for 4 years to lose it to caution now." She looked at Maggie. "You trust this man?" "Yes," Maggie said, simply, completely. Ruth looked at Jack for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face, the steadiness of it, or the way he stood, or something else that women who'd spent long lives reading dangerous situations learned to look for, seemed to satisfy her. "Then he comes with us," she said. "But he takes the east door, and he doesn't speak if we pass anyone in the corridor." She looked at Jack. "Can you do quiet?" "Yes, ma'am," Jack said. "Good." Ruth turned toward the town end of the tunnel. "Keep up." They moved fast. Ruth's lantern made their shadows run ahead of them on the tunnel walls, and Maggie counted her breaths instead of her steps, keeping her focus on Ruth's back and the square weight of what was coming, and what needed to happen, and in what order. The lockbox. The plans. The mine. 4 days. She was almost to the light at the end of the tunnel when Jack's hand closed briefly on her arm, the lightest possible touch, and she stopped. "Maggie," he said. She turned. His face was close in the low light. He was looking at her with an expression that had crossed out of practical and into something else, something that sat quietly behind his eyes and had no name that she was ready to give it. "Whatever's in that box," he said. "Whatever your father knew. Whatever he was protecting." He held her gaze. "You're not looking at it alone. All right?" She didn't know what to do with that. It moved through her in a way she wasn't prepared for. Not as sentiment, but as something structural. Something that filled in a gap she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "All right," she said. They stepped out of the tunnel and into the edge of ridgeline, and the full weight of what they were walking into settled around them both like the summer night air, heavy, close smelling of wood smoke and horse, and something like danger, and something else that might have been, if she let herself believe in such things, the very edge of hope. And then Ruth stopped walking, and Maggie looked up, and Eli Crow was standing at the end of the alley 20 feet away, with 3 men behind him and a lantern in his hand, and his eyes moving from Ruth to Maggie to Jack, with the slow, cold satisfaction of a man who had been waiting for exactly this. "Well now," Crow said. He had a voice like gravel under a boot heel, and he was smiling. And the smile was the worst thing about him, exactly as she remembered. "Look what found its way home." Nobody moved. That was the first thing, the strange suspended second, where nobody in that alley moved at all. And the only sound was the crackle of Crow's lantern, and somewhere far off, a dog barking at nothing. Maggie counted 3 men behind Crow. Jack had already counted them too. She could tell by the way his weight had shifted, subtle and complete, his right hand dropping half an inch toward his hip. Crow was smiling. He liked this part. She knew that about him, knew it the way you knew things about a predator you'd watched operate from close range for years. Eli Crow loved the moment before. The moment when the other person understood the shape of what was happening and hadn't yet accepted it. "I heard you were dead," he said. He tilted his head, studying her face with the lantern held up. "You look dead. Almost." "I've been told I'm hard to finish," Maggie said. His smile didn't change. "Not that hard." He looked at Jack, slow and assessing the way a man looked at something he was pricing. "Don't know you," he said. "No," Jack said. "You don't." "Friend of hers." "That's right." "Unfortunate for you," Crow said. He looked at Ruth, and the smile finally changed, went flatter, colder. "Ruth, you been busy." Ruth didn't answer. She was holding her rifle and her lantern, and her back was straight, and her face was a closed door, the face of a woman who had decided something and wasn't available for discussion about it. "Put the rifle down," Crow said to her, almost gentle. "You're not going to use it." "You don't know that," Ruth said. "You're 63 years old, and you've never shot a man in your life." He took 1 step forward. "Put it down." Ruth's hands tightened on the stock. And Jack moved. Not toward Crow. He stepped sideways, fast and decisive, putting himself between Ruth and the 3 men behind Crow, and his rifle came up in the same motion, smooth as water, and he had it leveled at the man on Crow's left before any of them had fully processed that he'd moved. "The lady said she doesn't know that," Jack said. His voice was absolutely calm. "I'd take that seriously if I were you." Crow looked at him. Something shifted in his expression, the smile held, but behind it, something recalculated. "1 man," Crow said. "Against 4. 1 man who's got your leftmost gun in his sights and can drop him before any of you clear leather," Jack said. "After that it gets complicated for everybody. But it gets complicated for him first." He didn't blink. "You want to run that arithmetic, go ahead. I've got time." The man on Crow's left had gone very still. He was younger than the others, and young men who'd never been on the wrong end of a rifle, held by someone who absolutely meant it, had a specific look about them. He had that look. Crow read it too. "What is it you think you're accomplishing tonight?" Crow said, and now he was talking to Maggie, ignoring Jack, the way you ignored a problem you'd decided to deal with later. "The journal is gone. Caleb knows you're alive. There's 30 armed men in this town, and you walked into the middle of it." He spread his free hand. "Whatever the plan was, Mrs. Larson, it's done. My name," she said, "is Maggie Reynolds. You married him legal. He had my father killed and then married me to keep me quiet." She held Crow's eyes. "That's not a marriage. That's a prison sentence. And I'm done serving it." Something moved across his face. Not conscience, she didn't think Eli Crow had anything left that resembled a conscience. But recognition. The recognition that she had become something different from the woman who'd been put in that canyon. Something that wasn't afraid of him anymore, and he could see it, and he didn't know yet what to do with it. "Take them," he said. And everything happened at once. Jack fired not at the man he'd been aiming at, but at the lantern in Crow's hand. The shot was perfect. The lantern exploded and dropped them all into sudden darkness, and the alley erupted in shouting and movement. And Maggie grabbed Ruth's arm and ran. She ran without seeing, pulling Ruth behind her, her ribs screaming, her boots finding the ground by memory and instinct and the particular skill of a woman who'd spent years learning to move through dark spaces without making sound. Behind her, she heard Jack a scramble, a collision. Someone hitting the alley wall hard, and she wanted to stop, wanted to turn, and she didn't. She ran. They came out of the alley into the back lane behind the kitchen quarters, and Maggie didn't slow down. She pulled Ruth to the east door of the house, the one Ruth had told Jack about, and Ruth got her hand on the latch, and they were inside, and the door shut behind them. And for one terrible moment, Maggie stood in the dark of the kitchen corridor, pressing her back against the door, listening. Shouts outside, running feet. Then a whistle, 3 short, 1 long, and then silence. "What does that mean?" Ruth breathed. "I don't know," Maggie said. "Jack." "He can handle himself," Ruth said. She said it firmly, like a woman who'd decided to believe something and wasn't open to argument. "Come. We don't have time." "Balsoy." Ruth's room was at the end of the kitchen corridor past the storeroom and the bread pantry, a room so small and bare that it had never once interested anyone who came into this house looking for things worth taking. That was, Maggie understood now, the entire point. Her father had known that too. He'd known exactly whose hands were the safest in this house. Ruth pulled up the floorboard beside the bed without ceremony, the practiced ease of 4 years of keeping this secret, and lifted out a metal box, roughly the size of a Bible, scarred and plain with a simple clasp lock. She held it out to Maggie. Maggie took it. The weight of it was wrong too much for paper alone. Something solid inside alongside whatever documents her father had left. She looked at the lock, looked at her hands. Then she pressed her thumb against the clasp, the way she'd pressed it against 100 small locks when she was a girl, and she felt for the specific imperfection her father had built into every lock he'd ever made. A slight rise on the left side of the clasp that, when depressed at the correct angle, released the catch without a key. He'd taught her that when she was 9 years old. "Every lock I make will open for you," he'd said, "because you're the only one I trust with everything." The box opened. Inside, a folded set of mine plans dense with her father's precise drafting. A letter sealed her name on the outside in his handwriting. And wrapped in oilcloth, something small and rectangular that she unwrapped with careful hands. A second journal. Not her father's field journal, a different one. Smaller. The cover was plain dark blue, and when she opened it, the handwriting inside wasn't her father's. She turned to the first page. "If you're reading this, then William is gone, and I'm gone," and Maggie found her way through, God willing. The handwriting was small and careful and slanted to the left, and she didn't recognize it, but the name at the bottom of the first page she did. Daniel Holt. The room tilted. "Ruth," she said. Her voice came out strange. "Did you know what was in here?" "No," Ruth said. "I swear to you, I never opened it." Holt was alive, or had been alive when he wrote this. She turned pages, dates, coordinates, descriptions she couldn't fully process in the dark, and the urgency and the fear. But one thing came through clearly. One thing repeated across 4 pages, in varying forms and increasing urgency. The silver mine wasn't just a silver mine. Beneath level 3 past the old survey room there was a 4th level that appeared on no official plan, because her father had never submitted the 4th level survey to the Territorial Records Office. He'd sat on it deliberately, understanding what it meant before Caleb had. And what it meant was this: the silver on levels 1 through 3 was significant. The copper deposit on level 4 was worth 10 times the silver. Enough to make Caleb Larson's current empire look like a prospecting claim. Caleb didn't know about level 4. He'd bought the mine for the silver and the land surrounding it, and he had never had it properly surveyed because he'd assumed the survey his purchase included was complete. It was not complete. And Holt's journal had the coordinates, the full survey. Proof of the deposit, and proof that the land above it, the land Caleb was currently in the process of transferring to a Denver lawyer, was worth a magnitude more than anyone involved in the transfer understood. Which meant one more thing that Maggie worked out in the span of about 10 cold, silent seconds. If this became known before the deed transfer completed, every person Caleb had defrauded to get that land had grounds for an entirely separate legal claim, one based not on the silver that had been stolen, but on the copper that had been hidden. One that federal law treated differently, one that a territorial judge couldn't quietly bury because the scale of it would force federal involvement regardless. Her father hadn't just been protecting evidence of Caleb's crimes. He'd been protecting a weapon. She was still processing this when the east door opened and Jack came through it. He was breathing hard. His coat was torn at the left shoulder, and there was blood on his jaw from a cut above his ear that was still running, and he moved with the careful speed of a man running on adrenaline while something else hurt. "We have maybe 10 minutes, he said. He looked at Maggie, then at the box in her hands. "You found it." "More than I expected," she said. "Are you hurt?" "Cut," he said. "It's not significant." He crossed the room to her. "Tell me." She told him, fast stripped to essentials the way she'd learned to communicate information in this house, no wasted words, no wasted time. The 4th level, the copper deposit, Holt's journal, the magnitude of what was buried. She watched his face move through it, in real time, the initial attention, the sharpening understanding the moment it landed fully, and his expression went through something complicated, and then came out the other side, into something very still. "The land transfer," he said. "If it completes, it doesn't matter," she said. "A third party who purchased in good faith even through fraud muddies the federal claim badly enough that Caleb's lawyers could delay justice for years." She looked at him. "We have 4 days. 3 now," he said. "Crow's going to Caleb tonight. When Caleb hears you got away again, he's going to move the timeline. He'll push the Denver lawyer to get here faster." He looked at the journal in her hands. "How do we get this to Cheyenne?" "Porter," she said immediately. "We get to Porter's, we send Holt's journal ahead with a rider. But we still need my father's journal. Holt's evidence only means something in conjunction with the original claims my father documented. Without the theft and the fraud, the copper deposit is just a dispute over land value." "So we still need to go into the mine," Jack said. "Yes." They looked at each other. "Tonight," Ruth said from behind them both. They turned. She was standing by the door with her rifle and a satchel she'd clearly been packing while they talked, her face composed and decided. "Not tomorrow," Ruth said. "Caleb sleeps heavy from the laudanum he takes for his back every night after 9 o'clock. Crow won't reach him before 10. If you move in the next hour, you have a window." She pulled the satchel strap over her shoulder. "I know which of the mine guards takes a long supper and which ones play cards on shift. I know the rotations. I've cooked for those men for 4 years, and they've never once thought I was paying attention." She looked at Jack. "You need me." Jack looked at Maggie. Maggie looked at Ruth. "You're 63 years old," Maggie said. "And I've been waiting 4 years to be useful," Ruth said flatly. "Don't insult me." Jack almost smiled. "Not quite." "What's the entry point?" "East shaft access," Ruth said. "Loading door. The guard there, Willie Pierce, takes his supper at the cookhouse at 9 sharp. He's there 40 minutes exactly, has been for 2 years. The man is a creature of habit." She paused. "We go at 9. We're in and out in 30 minutes. "The survey room is on level 3, Maggie said. She spread her father's plans on the bed, and all three of them looked. Her father's drafting was precise and dated and complete, through 3 levels access shafts, cross tunnels. The survey room, marked in the southeast corner of level 3, reached by a secondary ladder shaft off the main descent. There. Jack put his finger on the secondary ladder. 15 feet from the main shaft. If anyone's on level 3, we come up behind them, not in front. There's one man on level 3 during night shift, Ruth said. He walks the survey room perimeter every 20 minutes, last I knew. Then we go in, go down, get the journal, come up. Get out, Jack said. He looked at Maggie. All of this assumes the journal is where Caleb moved it, and that nobody's moved it again since yesterday morning. It'll be there, Maggie said. Caleb moved it because he was scared. Scared men put things in the place they believe is most protected. The mine is the place he trusts most. He won't move it again. Moving it twice would mean he doesn't trust his own choices, and Caleb Larson cannot stand not trusting himself. Jack looked at her. You know him that well. I know him better than I know anyone alive, she said. That's what 4 years in close proximity to a monster will do for you. She folded the plans carefully and put them in the satchel alongside Holt's journal and her father's letter still sealed. Let's move. They got to the mine with 7 minutes before 9 o'clock, moving through the back streets of Ridgeline in the particular way that Ruth navigated them, not sneaking exactly, but moving with the purposeful normalcy of a woman who belonged in those streets and had every right to be in them. Ruth had lived in this town for 11 years and knew every face and every shortcut, and she moved through it like water. Jack stayed close. Maggie stayed between them. Willie Pierce walked to the cookhouse at 6 minutes past 9. They watched him go from the shadow of the equipment shed, and when he was through the cookhouse door, Jack moved to the loading entrance and had it open in 30 seconds, and they were inside. The descent was fast and quiet. Level 1, Level 2. The secondary ladder narrow and steep, the rungs worn smooth down to 3. Level 3 smelled of rock dust and old wood, and the particular sealed stillness of underground air that hadn't moved properly in years. They moved by the faint light of a single shielded lantern that Ruth had brought from her room, turned so low it barely pushed back the dark. The survey room door was unlocked. Of course it was. Nobody got to level 3, except Caleb's men, and Caleb's men didn't lock doors because they didn't expect anyone to be where they were. Inside the room, shelves of record boxes, a desk, a filing cabinet, and on the desk, not even hidden well, just set there under a stack of ledger books, a journal with a plain cover that Maggie recognized the instant the lantern light touched it. Her father's handwriting on the spine. The year of his death. She crossed the room in 4 steps and picked it up and opened it, and there was his voice, his careful hand, his meticulous record of everything he'd witnessed and documented and been murdered for protecting. She pressed it against her chest for exactly 3 seconds. No more. Then she put it in the satchel and turned around. Jack was watching her from the door with an expression she couldn't name and didn't try to. Ruth was watching the corridor. Done, Maggie said. Then we go? Jack said. They were back up the secondary ladder in 4 minutes. Level 2, Level 1. The loading door. Jack cracked it open and looked and went still. Maggie's hand found Ruth's arm in the dark. Pierce is back early, Jack said. Very low. He's at the equipment shed. Hasn't seen us yet. The cookhouse was 30 yards away. Pierce had his back to them, fiddling with something on the shed wall, but he'd turn around and the loading door would be directly in his sight line. 20 seconds, maybe 30. I can draw him off, Ruth said. Absolutely not, Maggie said. I walk out the supply entrance natural as anything and tell him the cook's asking if anyone's checked the ore cart deliveries because something's short in the count. Ruth's voice was perfectly steady. I've done it before. He won't think twice. If he looks at you wrong, I'll handle it, Ruth said. I have handled far worse than Willie Pierce for 4 years. She looked at Maggie. Trust me. A beat. A long beat. 30 seconds after you step out, Jack said. "We move on your signal." "I'll cough twice," Ruth said. "You go for the south fence." And before anyone could say another word, Ruth opened the supply entrance door and stepped out into the night like a woman who had every reason to be there because she always had. And she called to Pierce in a voice so perfectly ordinary it was almost beautiful. And Pierce turned toward her, and his back came fully to the loading door. And 2 minutes later, Ruth coughed twice, and Jack and Maggie were through the fence and into the dark beyond the mine property. They were 100 yards clear before Maggie let herself breathe. The satchel was across her shoulder, both journals inside it her father's letter. Holt's coordinates. Everything. All of it. The whole weight of what 4 years had cost her father, and what 4 years had cost her reduced to the weight of paper and ink in a battered satchel carried through the summer night in a town full of men who would kill her for it. Jack pulled them into the shadow of the water tower at the town's south edge, and they stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Ruth," she started. "She'll get back to the house," he said. "She's been doing this alone for 4 years. Give her that." She made herself nod. "Porter's," he said. "Tonight. We ride now, we can reach him by dawn. He gets Holt's journal on the road to Cheyenne before Caleb wakes up and rewrites the morning. And my father's journal goes with us to Cheyenne." He looked at her steadily. "Together." She held that word for a moment. Together. The weight of it was different from most words. It had substance. "There's still the transfer agent," she said. 4 days. 3, he said. "But 3 is enough if we ride hard." He looked at the satchel. "You have what you came for. You have more than you came for. Now we run." She looked back toward Ridgeline. Somewhere in there, Ruth was walking back to her small room with her straight back and her steady hands. Somewhere in there, Caleb Larson was sleeping his laudanum sleep, not yet knowing that everything he'd built on a dead man's evidence was about to come apart. Somewhere in there, Eli Crow was waiting. "He'll come after us," she said. "Yes," Jack said. "He'll ride hard. Harder than us, probably. He knows this country." "So do you," she said. Something moved through his expression. Not confidence exactly. He wasn't a man who performed confidence. Just certainty. The specific calm of a person who has made a decision and stopped arguing with themselves about it. "I know it well enough," he said. He held out his hand for the satchel. Not taking it, offering to carry it while she climbed. She handed it to him without hesitation. He slung it over his own shoulder, and they moved for the horses. The summer night pressed down around them, and the stars were enormous and indifferent overhead. And somewhere behind them, a lantern came on in an upper window of the Larson house, and then another, and then the sound of a door opening hard. They were already running. They rode hard through what remained of the night. Maggie heard the horses behind them before Jack did, or maybe he heard them first and said nothing, buying her 30 more seconds of not knowing. Either way, by the time they cleared the first canyon ridge and hit the open flat beyond it, the sound was unmistakable. Multiple horses, moving fast. Too fast for men who weren't certain of their direction, which meant Crow had found their trail already, and that was faster than either of them had counted on. "How many?" she called. 4. Maybe 5. Jack didn't look back. "Don't look back. Keep riding." She kept riding. Her ribs had crossed the boundary from pain into something abstract. A constant presence she'd stopped negotiating with and started ignoring the way you ignored a fire alarm when you were already running out of the building. The satchel was across Jack's back, and she could see it every time his horse pulled a length ahead of her on the narrower sections of the trail, and she focused on it. The journals. Her father's handwriting. Holt's coordinates. Everything. "Porter's is 40 minutes at this pace," Jack said. "Crow's 45 behind us," she said. "Then we have 5 minutes when we get there." 5 minutes. She ran the arithmetic. Porter's boy on the road to Cheyenne with Holt's journal, that was one thing, and it needed to happen in those 5 minutes. The rest of it, her father's journal. The two of them, the road to Cheyenne was a different calculation, and she could feel the shape of it going wrong in real time. "Jack," she said. "I know," he said. "They'll cut us off before Cheyenne if we stay on the main road." "I know. We need another way. I'm working on it." He leaned forward over his horse's neck, and the Mustang opened up, and she pushed her own horse to match it, and they flew across the flat together in the dark. The summer stars enormous and cold overhead, the sound of pursuit a steady pressure behind them that she refused to let become fear. She thought about her father, the way he'd sat at his drafting table when she was young, working in the lamplight, with his careful hands building his precise maps of the land around him. He'd loved this territory in a particular, private way, not the way men who wanted to own things loved it, but the way a man loved something he was trying to understand. He'd mapped it because he wanted to know it, and knowing it had gotten him killed. She was going to make that mean something. She had promised him that in the canyon 2 days ago, crawling through his dirt with her ribs broken and her cheek split and not one single thing left except the promise. She was going to keep it. Porter's light was visible 20 minutes out, a single lantern in the window, burning all night the way Porter burned it every night had for years. Because a dark way station was a dead way station, and Porter was not a man who invited death. They came in hard and fast, and the dog came out barking, and Jack was off his horse before it fully stopped moving to the door, and Porter was already in it. "Riders behind us," Jack said. 5 minutes, maybe less. I need your fastest boy on the road to Cheyenne tonight. Right now." Porter looked at him, looked at Maggie, looked at the satchel. "Come in," he said. They had the journal out and wrapped in oilcloth, and inside a sealed leather pouch that Porter produced from somewhere in his kitchen in under 2 minutes. Porter's boy, 14, lean, with the serious eyes of a child who'd grown up understanding that the adults around him dealt in genuine stakes, was saddled and standing ready in another 90 seconds. The boy had made this ride before. Porter told him who to deliver to in Cheyenne, told him the name twice, made him repeat it, and the boy nodded once and rode without ceremony into the dark. "He'll make it," Porter said. "Not a hope, a statement." "He needs to," Maggie said. Behind them, the sound of hooves on the canyon trail, getting louder. "Back door," Porter said, already moving. "East field, there's a dry creek bed that runs north for 3 miles before it hits the ridge road. Crow doesn't know it. It dried up 6 years back, and it's not on any current map." He looked at Jack. "It'll add an hour to your ride to Cheyenne." "Better than what Crow adds," Jack said. Porter looked at Maggie. Something in his face that was rough and genuine and not comfortable with sentiment, but trying anyway. "Your father was a good man," he said. "He surveyed my land grant back in '68. Didn't charge me the full rate because he said the land was worth helping an honest man keep." He pressed his lips together. "Go finish it." She didn't have words for that. She nodded, and it had everything in it, and Porter seemed to understand. They went out the back door at a dead run. The creek bed was exactly where Porter said it was. They dropped into it, and the walls came up on either side, and the sound of the world above them changed Crow's men audible for another minute, then fading as the distance and the terrain swallowed the sound. Jack set a hard pace, but not a reckless one, reading the creek bed's floor in the dark, with the particular skill of a man who'd spent months learning how land felt under a horse's feet when you couldn't fully see it. Maggie rode and thought and let the thinking settle into something clear. "The deed transfer," she said. "The Denver lawyer." 3 days out, Jack said. 2 now. We've lost a day." She worked through it. "The federal marshal in Cheyenne, what do you know about him?" "Henry Marsh. Not the same Marsh. Been in the position 8 years. Reputation for being the kind of man who can't be bought because he's already decided what he is." Jack glanced at her. "Porter told me about him 6 months ago. Said Marsh had been looking for a way into Caleb's operation for 2 years, but couldn't get inside the territory without local cooperation, and the local cooperation was all Caleb's." "Holt's journal changes that," Maggie said. A copper deposit of that scale is federal jurisdiction, regardless of what the territorial judge says. Marsh can move on it independently. She paused. If he gets Holt's journal in time. Porter's boy rides like his life depends on it, Jack said. I watched him saddle that horse. He knows what he's carrying. And my father's journal. We carry that ourselves. He looked over at her. All the way to Cheyenne. She nodded. They rode the creek bed for an hour in close working silence, the good kind, the kind that had something in it rather than nothing. She found herself thinking about what came after Cheyenne in a way she hadn't let herself before because before had always felt too uncertain to plan past. Now it felt different. The weight of the satchel on Jack's back. The 5-minute window at Porter's that they'd made with 2 minutes to spare. Ruth's straight back, walking out the supply entrance into the lamplight like she owned the night. Things had gone right. Enough of them. Against long odds and a man with 30 armed allies and 4 years of careful construction behind him, enough things had gone right. She was starting to believe they might actually do this. Which was, of course, precisely when the creek bed ended, and they came up onto the ridge road and found Eli Crow waiting. He was alone. That was the first thing and the most alarming thing, because Eli Crow alone was not Eli Crow. Abandoned, it was Eli Crow having sent his men somewhere else while he covered the ground he'd calculated they'd reach. He'd known the creek bed, or he'd known enough of the territory to predict where it came out. Either way, he was there, and he was off his horse standing in the middle of the road with his rifle pointed at Jack and his eyes on Maggie. Jack's horse came up short. Maggie's pulled up beside him. Nobody spoke for a long second. "Get down," Crow said. "No," Maggie said. His eyes moved to her. "You want to reconsider that?" "I've been reconsidering things for 4 years," she said. "I'm done with it. Whatever you're going to do, Eli, do it. But we're not getting down." Something crossed his face, anger, and underneath it, something older and less clean. He'd spent his life being the thing people were afraid of. It had shaped him, the way water shaped stone, slowly and completely, until the fear of other people was so fundamental to his identity that a woman who wasn't afraid of him was genuinely disorienting. "The journals," he said. "Give them over, and I'll let you walk away." "You won't," Jack said. "Carter." Crow's eyes moved to him. "I know who you are now. Tom Carter's brother. I heard about you." His jaw tightened. Tom brought it on himself. Jack went completely still. The kind of still that was more dangerous than movement. "Say that again," Jack said. He wouldn't leave the claim. Caleb gave him 3 chances. He wouldn't leave because it was his, Jack said. His voice was flat and cold and absolutely final. Because he'd earned it, because no piece of paper a bought judge signed changed what was true. He looked at Crow across the distance between them. "You know what was true. You were there, and you let it happen, and you've been letting things happen ever since because it pays, and because you told yourself the people it happened to deserved it, or brought it on themselves, or didn't matter." He paused. "Tom Carter mattered. Every person in that journal mattered. And you know it. That's the thing you're going to have to live with." Crow's rifle didn't waver, but something in his face did, and Maggie moved, not toward Crow. She turned her horse sideways deliberately, and reached into the satchel on Jack's back, and pulled out her father's journal and held it up so Crow could see it clearly in the pale pre-dawn light. "You see this," she said. "This is every name, every deed, every order Caleb gave, and every death he paid for, including my father." She held it steady. "There is another journal already on its way to Cheyenne. Nothing you do to us in this road changes that. That journal is riding hard, and it will reach the federal marshal, and Caleb Larson will burn for what he's built whether we're alive to see it or not." She looked at Crow directly. "The only question left is what you do right now. In this road, with that rifle." Crow stared at her. "You can shoot us and ride back to Ridgeline," she said. "And in 3 days you can watch everything Caleb built come down around both of you. Or She let the word sit. Or you can put that rifle down and tell me where Marcus Larson is. Crow blinked. What? Caleb's brother Marcus. He's been running the deed paperwork from the Denver end. I know he's in the territory he was seen in Laramie 2 weeks ago. She hadn't known this until she'd read Holt's journal in Ruth's room, a passing reference that had landed and stuck. Marcus knows where every body is buried and who held the shovel. He's Caleb's insurance. But a man who is someone else's insurance isn't loyal. He's trapped. And a trapped man will deal if the deal is good enough. She met Crow's eyes. Where is he? Crow looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. The rifle came down. Not all the way, halfway, like a man negotiating with his own hands. Laramie, Crow said, hotel on the south end. Goes by the name Aldridge when he's traveling. He said it the way a man said something he'd been deciding about for longer than the current conversation. Like he'd been holding that information the way you held a card you weren't sure when to play. Marcus has been wanting out for 2 years. Caleb doesn't know. Jack looked at Maggie. Maggie looked at Crow. Why are you telling me this? A long silence. Because Tom Carter worked a clean claim, Crow said. The words came out rough and unwilling and utterly without excuse. And I was there. He lowered the rifle the rest of the way. I've been there for all of it. And you're right that I know it. He looked at the ground. Then back up. You get that journal to Cheyenne. You get Marcus to talk. Caleb goes down for all of it. He stepped off the road. And I'm not in this road when you get back. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Jack turned his horse toward Cheyenne and Maggie turned hers alongside his, and they rode past Eli Crow in the early gray light of the summer morning, and neither of them looked back. They reached Cheyenne on the second day. Federal Marshal Henry Marsh was exactly what Porter had said, a compact gray-haired man with steady eyes and a lawyer's habit of listening entirely before he said anything at all. He read 12 pages of her father's journal at his desk without speaking. Then he read 4 pages of Holt's journal, which his deputy had received from Porter's boy 6 hours earlier and had been holding, and he set both documents down flat with his palms and looked at Maggie across the desk. How long did you carry this? He said. 4 years building it, she said. 3 days getting it here. Marsh looked at Jack, then back at her. Marcus Larson, he said. You said you had a location. Laramie. Hotel on the south end. Name of Aldridge. She paused. He wants out. You offer the right terms, he'll give you everything Caleb has left to hide. Marsh was already writing. He looked up at his deputy. The deputy was already at the door. Deed transfer, Maggie said. The Denver lawyer. He arrives in 2 days. That transfer will not complete, Marsh said. His voice was calm and absolute. I'll have an injunction on the territorial recorder's office within the hour. Nothing moves. He looked at her steadily. Mrs. Reynolds. Miss Reynolds, she said. A slight pause. Miss Reynolds, what you've brought me today, this is not a small thing. This is going to reach further than Caleb Larson. You understand that. I'm counting on it, she said. He nodded once, like a man who respected the answer. They were outside on the Cheyenne boardwalk when Jack said, It's done. She didn't answer right away. She stood there with the summer morning around her real and solid and full of ordinary sounds, wagons and voices, and a horse somewhere objecting to its situation, and she let it settle over her that it was actually done. That she was standing in Cheyenne with no one hunting her, and a federal marshal moving on Caleb Larson with the full weight of what her father had built and what she had carried. Done. There's still the trial, she said. Yes. And Marcus's testimony if he gives it. He'll give it. Jack leaned against the post beside her. A man who's been trapped for 2 years and just got offered a door, he'll walk through it. And Crow. Crow's his own accounting, Jack said. That's between him and what he can live with, not your weight to carry. She looked at her hands. The cuts from the canyon floor were healed to pink lines now, the kind of marks that would fade to almost nothing over time. Almost. Not entirely. "I haven't read my father's letter," she said. Jack looked at her. The sealed one, from the box. She'd carried it through all of it, the canyon and the tunnel and the mine and the road, without opening it. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because she'd needed to be finished first. Maybe because she'd needed to earn it. "I think I want to read it somewhere quiet." "All right," he said, simply, like every other reasonable thing she'd said. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "After Cheyenne. After the trial." She meant it as a simple statement of fact, and it came out sounding like something more than that, something that had a question underneath it. Jack was quiet for a moment. "I've got Tom's claim to settle," he said. "Land still sitting there. House Tom built still standing on it, far as I know." A pause. "Wyoming's got a lot of good land around it. A man who knew what he was looking for could file a clean claim on something worth having." She looked at him. "Porter told me there's a doctor in Ridgeline who's been wanting to leave for 2 years. He continued, looking at the street in front of them with a careful and deliberate casualness. "Town," he said, "was too lawless. With Caleb gone and Marsh's people moving in, the town changes shape. A doctor might stay." He paused again. "Or a woman who knows land law and mineral claims, and how to read a cipher, might find considerable use for those skills in a territory that's about to have a lot of contested property and not enough honest people to sort it." She considered this. The careful shape of what he was describing, not a promise, not a declaration, nothing that asked her for something she hadn't offered. Just a picture of a territory she knew, and work that mattered, and a man who happened to be planning to be in the same general area. "You're not exactly asking me anything," she said. "No, ma'am," he agreed. "I'm not." He looked at her sideways. "You're not the kind of woman who answers questions she wasn't asked. I figured I'd lay out the territory and let you decide what you want to do with it." She felt something shift in her chest that wasn't quite a laugh, and wasn't quite a sob, and was something she hadn't felt in so long she'd genuinely forgotten it had a name. It was the specific feeling of being understood cleanly, accurately, without effort or agenda by another person. "Jack," she said. "Yes. When this is over. When the trial is done, and Tom's claim is settled and the land is sorted." She looked at him. "Ask me." He looked back at her. Something moved through his expression, quiet and certain, and deeply, genuinely human. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I will." She opened her father's letter. His handwriting on the first line was steady and careful, the hand of a man who knew he was writing something that needed to last. "Maggie. If you found this, then you found your way through, and I always knew you would. Because you are the most stubborn, most capable, most fiercely honest person I have ever had the privilege of calling mine. The land doesn't matter. The journal doesn't matter. The only thing that ever mattered was that you survived this, and whatever life comes after it is one worth living. Find the people worth keeping. Hold them." She read it once. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket close to her chest, and she stood up straight with her healed hands and her mended ribs and the full summer morning around her. And for the first time in 4 years, Maggie Reynolds was not afraid of anything that was coming. She had walked out of a canyon on her hands and knees with 2 cracked ribs and no water, and nothing left but the particular stubborn refusal to die in a bad man's dirt, and she had brought down an empire, recovered her father's truth, and found the one thing she hadn't gone looking for. Caleb Larson was arrested in Ridgeline 3 days later. The deed transfer blocked the mine seized by federal order, and 37 families whose land had been stolen began the long process of getting it back. Marcus Larson testified for 6 hours and did not stop until there was nothing left to say. Eli Crow was not in the road when it happened, or anywhere near it. And Maggie Reynolds stood in a Cheyenne courtroom 2 months later and read from her father's journal in a clear, steady voice, every word landing in the silence of a room full of people who finally had to listen, and her father's name was spoken into the record for what he was, which was a good and honest man, who had known the truth and died protecting it, and whose daughter had carried it the rest of the way home. Some things cost everything you have, and some things are worth exactly that.